Now, inside of our app.js, we're calling that new create user profile document function that we just made. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we also call our set state with current user with the actual object itself. So what we'll do here is we will modify our code to make sure that we understand what's actually happening. So first, let's change user to user auth because now we know what we're getting back is a user auth. And we'll say if the user auth object is not null, meaning if it exists, right? We remember that user auth could be null when we're signing out, and we don't want to set anything here, right? If we're signing out. We remember what we get back from our function is the user ref. We made sure that we were passing back the user ref object, right? Right here at the end. We want it because we're going to use it to check if our database has updated at that reference with any new data. Very similar to our on-auth state change, we're kind of saying if the snapshot has changed. But chances are it won't have because we are not going to update the user ever inside of our code. But the pro of what this method will do, which I'll show you in a second, is that the moment it instantiates, meaning that the moment our code runs it, it will still send us a snapshot object representing the data that is currently stored in our database. And that method is on snapshot. Calling on snapshot is very similar to calling on auth state change. And what we get back is the snapshot object. And on the snapshot object is where we're going to get the data related to this user that we just possibly stored, right? If it was a new authentication, or the data related to the user that is already stored in our database. Now, let's talk about these snapshot objects. A document snapshot object is one that, of course, we get from our document reference object, right? Using the .get method, as we saw. It allows us to check if the document exists, as we know, but it also allows us to get properties of that data using the .data method. We actually do not get any data until we use the data method, so I'll show you. If right now I simply console log my snapshot. Here we get our snapshot. You see that it has it has the ID, but it doesn't have any of the properties. We have to call .data in order to actually see what our data looks like. And it'll come back to us as an object with those properties inside of our database, right? So the display name, email, and the created at, of course, are the properties that we use to store in here. So this is the main thing that we need to use, but we see that we don't have the ID. Now, if you remember, on the snapshot itself was the ID of where we currently are in our user ref, right? As well as the ID that represents the data of our snapshot right here. So we need to use these two things combined and call our set state of our current user right here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to call set state here, passing in an object with our current user value, going to the ID of our snapshot.id, and then we're going to spread in snapshot.data, right? Because we get back the object representing the values. So we're just creating a new object that has both all of the properties of our snapshot that we want, as well as the ID that we want. And then just to make sure we're getting everything, right? Let's just console log this .state, right? Just to make sure that we're getting this through. Now, outside of this function call, where we're checking whether or not the user auth exists, we also want to make sure that our app is aware if the user auth is null. Meaning if the user signs out, we still want to set current user to nothing as well. So if the user auth object comes back and it's null, then what we want to do after this is call this.setState, where current user goes to our user auth, which we know is null, right? So this is equivalent to saying current user to null. So now what will happen is if a user signs in, right, we'll check if they're actually signing in, right? Because we'll see if there's a user auth. So if there is, we will get back the user ref from our create user profile document method from the user auth object being passed in. If there was a document there, we will simply just get back the user ref. If there is no document there, we will create a new object and document, right, in that place, and we'll still get back the user ref. And then we're going to subscribe, meaning we're going to listen to this user ref, right, for any changes to that data, but we'll also get back the first state of that data. So then using that, we are going to set the state of our local app.js with the snapshot ID and the snapshot's data. And then if the user ever logs out, we'll make sure to set the current user to null, right? Setting it to the null that we'll get back from the auth library. And now that we have all of this, let's actually see what happens. We made a mistake with our console log. So if you remember, our console log can't go after setState because setState is asynchronous, meaning that there's a chance that when we call it, setState is not actually finished being called. The only way for us to make sure that setState is fully called and then we're able to see what the state of it is we pass a second function, right, as a parameter in setState as the second parameter, where we do the actual logging. And setState will then call our function after state is fully propagated. So now we see that we're actually storing our current user. And this is actually all of the data that we got from our database, as well as the created at sign and the ID. So hopefully this was not too overwhelming. I know that this is a lot of new code that we just covered. And it's definitely a lot of code that we haven't seen before, all related to the Firestore Firebase library. We've also mixed and matched the auth and the Firestore library code together to create these new objects inside of our database and then bring them back in and then store them. There's a lot of back and forth. I know it's a lot of confusing code, but also a confusing flow. But I promise you, the more you practice with both these ref objects and these snapshot objects, the better you'll understand the purpose of what each is for. And this is actually pretty much the core of how we use the Firestore library. It's actually really simple once you've mastered and understood these concepts that we've just covered. Now let's get rid of this because we don't need this anymore. And we'll work on our signup next, right? Which is more with our auth library. But now that we've done this flow inside of our app.js, if we add our signup with email and password, right, this code is all still going to work the exact same because we've compartmentalized our actual storage and our actual set state separately from our authentication. And that'll make more sense once we actually start writing the signup. But definitely rewatch these last few videos if you feel confused about Firebase. It's incredibly powerful, and it does have a bit of a learning curve to get used to how to use it, but it's very valuable because this is actually way, way easier than any other way of spinning up our own backend server and authentication service. So let's tackle signup next.